We're talking with Jim Groom, the Director of the Division of Teaching and Learning Technologies and Adjunct Professor at the University of Mary Washington, who teaches a course that ought to be known around the world. It already is known around the world to those of us who are really interested in pushing the envelope on online learning. It's called DS106, and the DS stands for Digital Storytelling. What's really interesting about this is the way it combines an open networked community with a campus-based course. So, Jim, tell us how it works.
DS106 is right. It's DS106 is its affectionate name. Its real name is Computer Science 106, which is just our arbitrary number. And we started teaching this in the spring of 2010, and it was a kind of 25-person traditional class at the University of Mary Washington where 25 students took it. I would give them feedback. I'd give them like 10 assignments, and the semester would be over. I liked the class. I had a lot of fun because I do enjoy teaching. But over the course of the next year, there were a lot of people who were interested in a couple of elements of the class. One of the things that the class was premised on was giving people their own domain and their own web host. So rather than using some third-party tool, we asked them to get their own space, to manage it, and to kind of install WordPress and just basically understand how something as simple as a LAMP environment, not simple actually, but by today's standards, it's relatively simple, and installing your own blog on there might be, and to have a domain map. So people wanted to know how to do that. So when I was talking with a group of people, I said, maybe we can do DS106 online openly so that, the people who want to get certain things out of it, like how to install their own blog on their own domain and web host, could. So in the spring of 2011, I had sat down with a group of people actually in December preparing for the spring, Tom Woodward, Alan Levine, and Martha Burtis. And what we figured out was not only how we could do this online, but how we could make the actual architecture in some ways resemble the web. So rather than being some siloed artifact, it would actually, in many ways, work like the web. And that means it would have to be open, it would have to be participatory, and it would have to be in some ways engaging in bits and pieces. So we built this, or Martha Burtis specifically built something called the assignment repository, which allowed students to basically submit their own assignments. And for me, that was what broke this class wide open, is the idea that not only are you taking this class for credit, but you can actually submit an assignment as a credit student at Mary Washington, and we've had this happen, and have 60 or 70 people around the world do it. People in Australia, people in Portugal, people in South America, particularly Argentina. I mean, it was just eye-opening for students to think that they had a community that they could riff on and riff with. And that was really, for me, one of the most interesting things about the class, because it's about critiquing and interrogating the online world, particularly when it comes to media like video, audio, photography, digital photography, and design. So those were our basic categories. But what we did is I had the 10 holy assignments, and we broke that open when we built the assignment repository because it allowed students to create all these different assignments, to bring in a kind of voice from the outside open world. And we actually were able to syndicate everyone's blogs into a central hub, DS106.us. And that hub is actually basically a syndication engine. It just republishes all the links to all the different posts happening around the community. And one of the interesting things that happens is you'll have, say, 300 or 400 open participants and 25 or 50 UMW students, but you don't know who's who. And so the distinction, we've made a distinction with tags so you can filter, but if you come to the blog for the first time, that distinction is not clear. And it actually blurs the idea of whether this is a class or this is an online open community. And that's a blurring that I really like. And I think it's very beneficial for the students to realize that there are people out in the web, out on the open web, who are reading their work, who are giving them encouragement, and who they can model their work after.
To what degree has the form of the course evolved from the student initiatives?
A lot. I mean, that's a really good point. We have a whole part of the site called inspired.ds106.us, and this was a site that, and I love to think of it, it's kind of like the students help build the course. They help build the course by submitting assignments, but they also help build the course by helping other students' feature work. There were two students, Linda McKenna and I don't know why, Rachel McGurk, who built this thing called Inspire, which was basically a space where students would go and submit a design assignment, a photograph, a video, or an audio assignment that inspired them. And everyone, we made that part of the class that you had to go in there and show the work that you were inspired by. And what we have there is a repository of work that is inspired. And it can be open online participants, it can be students. And that's something they built. And it's now part of the DS106 ecosystem. And it's not only students who are iterating out. Alan Levine went ahead and he built, alongside Tim Owens, who's another instructional technologist at UMW, they built the Daily Create. And the Daily Create was a very interesting concept, but not unique to DS106. There were two photographers, whose names I'm forgetting, who created this site called the Daily Shoot. And the Daily Shoot was a brilliant, open educational platform. It basically allowed anyone who had a camera and a Flickr account to go out and follow an assignment for that day, like take a picture of vertical lines or take a picture with the color red. And you went, you shot, you tagged it on Flickr with 2 tags, and it went up to a central repository. And so when you went to the Daily Shoot site, it had, 100 people's images side by side. You click on it, the image would come up, and you'd be able to kind of go through and see what people thought of the assignment. And I always thought that was so brilliant because it was like education through osmosis. Simply by taking a picture and tagging it correctly, you could bring it into a community who could look and then give you feedback. And that to me was the power of aggregation and syndication in the web. And these people had nailed it. So they actually got tired of doing the site. They weren't kind of, going on with it. So they closed it. So Alan Levine, who turned me on to Daily Shoot, said, we should build our own on DS106. And we did. And it's called the Daily Create. And it's not limited to photographs. It also has audio, video, and writing assignments. And I really love it. It's just a daily little kind of getting the idea and the habit of creating and being creative. And I think that's a great little element that we built on to the class site, like the assignments. And I like that DS106 in some ways is like a house. You start off, it's one big room everybody lives in. You got a couple of cots, and they're syndication cots. But then you build another room, the kitchen, and that's kind of like the Daily Create, or the den. That's where you do the assignments. And it's kind of like, as a system, it's more of a framework, and it's organically growing out based on the iterations of the class, which I think is probably the best way to do it, rather than someone having you build a system and say, you will teach within this. I'd like to have us say, let's teach, let's see what it's like, and then let's build a system around that that's loose enough that it can work for anyone across disciplines. Because the idea is that DS106 isn't only about digital storytelling, it's about how we use media to actually build out what we know about a particular discipline. And that's where I think the radio is really interesting. Because you could stop me at any time, Howard, because I talk. But the radio is really interesting in that Grant Potter, who's, a mad genius, was up in University of Northern British Columbia at the time. He's originally from Nova Scotia, but he was teaching and working in instructional technology up in Northern British Columbia. He saw one of my tweets where I basically said, I don't want to use an LMS. I don't want to use Illuminate or anything like that, because it undercuts the value and the beauty and the aesthetic of being online to me. So I want a radio station. And so Grant just had happened to be creating an internet radio station for a group of students. He knew the technology, and he said, you want a radio station? I'll give you a radio station. And within 10 days, the class, and this was while the class was happening, the class had a radio station. By week 6, so that was week 3, by week 6, we had integrated the idea of the radio station into the assignments for the audio week, so that all students had to do a half-hour radio show. They had to create bumpers, commercials. They loved it. They went psycho. And we had a platform now that potentially hundreds of people could listen to it. Usually it wasn't hundreds. It was 15 or 20 or 30, but it was an audience. And that mattered. And I really was blown away in that first semester, this was spring 2011, by what you could do when you teach openly. Because people have fun, they iterate, they're doing stuff anyway that somehow intersects with what you're doing, and they're excited. And I've never been part of a process that has been so kind of communally organized and created. Now, obviously, if you have radio, what's going to naturally follow is TV, right? So week 9 or 10, we had 2 people, Zach Dowell and Tim Owens, who were both, one was an actually at the time they were both open online participants. Tim Owens actually, as a result of DS106, got a job with us, which is a whole nother story. But they actually said, you know what? Let's build a TV station. And they did. And they were using live stream at the time, and that was kind of too expensive. And so we were iterating around, and by the end of the semester, we hadn't had it figured out. By July, when we taught a summer class, which was 5 weeks old or 5 weeks long, we actually got a kit where we streamed our own video through Amazon, and we actually had a streaming TV show of episodes. And that class was interesting because we taught that as a character. We had a professor on the records, but the real professor was Dr. Oblivion, who was a creation. He wasn't real. He was from a David Cronenberg movie called Videodrome. And the whole trope was he has never dealt with anyone that has not been mediated by the computer for 27 years. And so it was interesting. That was the trope. That's how we taught the class. And I love the idea of a digital storytelling class having a narrative of its own that the students over the 5 weeks had to iterate on. And I'm really interested in that, and I'm doing that right now. I have a 5-week session going on now where the theme of the class is the Twilight Zone. It's called the DS106 Zone. And so everyone kind of iterates and plays off a series of kind of great Twilight Zone episodes, and their design assignments or their audio assignments or their video assignments are kind of reinforced by a central kind of common understanding of storytelling through some of the greatest TV that ever existed, the Twilight Zone. And it's a kind of a lot of fun to do stuff like that.
Jim, you ought to teach a course on how to do what you're doing. Has that ever occurred to you?
You know, I no, it never has. I think that I'm actually teaching it by just doing it online.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I
okay.
feel like
I have two questions then. One question is, so the first day of class with your residential students, how does that work? How do you tell them what you're going to do? I guess they already have some idea about what this is about,
Yeah.
but I found that you're kind of swimming upstream with students' training in many ways. They
Sure.
expect you to tell them stuff, and they're going to take notes and have tests, and you're expecting them to really participate. How do you frame that?
That's a good question. And we do it differently for the face-to-face classes than we do for the online. So I'll talk to the face-to-face, then I'll switch to the online students because it is a different process. For the face-to-face students, when I go in there the first day, I say, look, there's going to be a lot of turnaround. I kind of try and, speak truth to power. Like, look, this is a ton of work. You're going to say about week 4 or 5, this is too much work for a 100-level class, which me and Martha Burtis always kind of joke about. What does that mean? But, I don't know what that means. But we demand a lot of students and a consistent demand for a lot of work over that first 5 to 10 weeks. And when it hits audio and video, as you know, do a lot of video. Video is demanding. And so we only give them 2 weeks. And that's 2 weeks to figure out codecs, 2 weeks to figure out compression, 2 weeks to figure out whatever editing software they're going to do, because we never teach the tool. We only teach the concepts behind the tool and the concepts behind the storytelling. And we say, look, there's enough resources out there for you to learn the tool. So we try and give a kind of scare talk the first week. So opposite of a pep talk, like you better have time. If this is not a good semester for you, don't do it. If you're taking 5 classes, don't do it. If you're not interested in this stuff, don't do it. And usually that works. You get like 5 or 6 people who will leave right away. And then there's usually a waiting list for this class because it's got a certain amount of popularity now. And then 5 or 6 students come in and you give them the same talk independently and then you're off. And, the students have been amazing. I can't, this class wouldn't be what it is, and it wouldn't be what it is and what it has been if it weren't for those registered UMW students. Because the open online participants are great, but they come and they go and they do their thing and they're awesome. But the students are locked in and they're going through an experience that it's demanded of them that they perform. And I think that creates a certain amount of kind of cogency to the community, right? It gives you a sense of coherence to the experience, at least for me and for them, because we're going through it together. And I think it's great because I have students on Twitter in particular that have been through this class before, like a year before or 2 years before, who'll come in and who'll encourage the students, who will share their work, and who'll basically kind of act as a larger community of just students. The same thing happens with the open online participants. We have like years of people now who've been through the DS106 experience, but it's not about a 10-week or a 15-week or a 5-week class for them. It's about the idea of, oh, wait, I want to experiment with this assignment for this day. And they will, and then they'll give other people feedback, and then they'll leave. And I really love the porous nature of it. And I think the students, once they realize that I'm not the only one reading their work and I won't read everything, they start to get excited. And I think they up their game significantly because they know, A, that there's a lot of talented people in the open online space, and they should know that. But B, because they're not working in a silo, but B, they know that their work is being judged on a different level and by level of people who they've never met. And so it makes them less likely, I think, to slack. Because they think I'm the only one who's going to look at it. They don't care. It's just, they throw that softball up. If I swing for it and hit it and like it, great. If not, okay, I'll get a B. You know what I mean? But if they know that other people are judging them and they're out in the open space, and when people Google them, their work is going to show up. I like that responsibility, and I like that idea of, they control it. They can basically delete the work when the class is over. I'm not about controlling their work. The idea is for them to think not only about creating in this space, but also what it means for them to shape their digital identity, what it means for them to shape who they are online. And I think that's the secret sauce to this class. We don't talk about it that much, but I want them to constantly think and reflect upon their creation and their process of creation so that when someone comes to their site, what they see is an amazing curation of a process for thinking, learning, and for being as a person in the 21st century. And, that's what you look for, I think, when you go and talk to people online. You want to see how they frame their ideas, how they frame their creativity, and how they share the work they're doing. And if I were to see one of these students, my goal would be, if I never knew them, I would go to their site and be like, wow, what a well-rounded, thoughtful, kind of creative person that has this space. And that's really what I think DS106 is pushing. And I don't think it's limited to digital storytelling. I think this is just one kind of boot camp-like class to get them ready for the various tools they might need to do that.
One of the things you mentioned, I think, is really a very big idea that's been laying there in front of us, and nobody has really seized yet, except for you, which is a course as a community that exists over time. Yeah. And if you think about it, it's the sausage factory. The little piggies walk into the class and the little sausages walk out of the class and then they're done with it. Having this community in which students who took the course before are active participants and mentors to students who are taking the course now, think of the huge potential energy there is in so many courses and so many institutions around the world that's just being wasted because they don't have that intergenerational connection. So, I think, you've stumbled on a lot of things that are very much bigger than one course here. I have one more question for you. This question, actually, I don't think you're going to be able to answer fully, and I want to encourage you to think about doing a course about it. What advice do you have for educators who may be inspired by what you're saying here, but don't know where to start? How do they start doing something that's more student-centric, more web-like, more open?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to that, and you're right. There's a lot more to think about it, and I won't have a full-formed answer yet. But I have been thinking a bit about this because people have asked me this question before, like, you do it, but I can't. And there's some reasons why I've been able to do it. I've spent, now 7 or 8 years on a tool like Twitter, doing what everyone said is nothing, right? Like that was the whole joke about Twitter. You're wasting your time. But it's amazing to me because 3 years ago when this class blew up, or 2 years ago, it blew up on Twitter. It blew up because I had a community of students that followed me. I've been doing this, and they could see the experimenting I was doing with DS106. They picked up on the hashtag, and they started to feed into that community. And so it wasn't simply a waste of time at that point. Twitter became an unbelievable space for me to invite people in, to talk to old students, to kind of talk smack in a fun way. And so Twitter became really, especially for the online class when I taught DS106, it became the platform for everything that's missing from traditional online learning. That hallway space, right? That space where you're joking around. Those interstitial spaces that aren't tested on and aren't assessed. But it's where all the learning happens. And Twitter provided that in spades. And it was amazing to me. So I think, I don't care if it's Twitter, I don't care if it's Google Plus, wherever you do it, you create your own tool. But, it being in a space where you feel like you can invite and engage a community is very important. The other thing is I ate all my own dog food. When I do this class, I do every assignment the students do, and I comment like a madman. Commenting builds community. When people know you're reading that you're reading their stuff, they react and they know. And I say to anyone, if you want to make your blog successful, whatever you're doing successful, you have to be in it. You have to be blogging. You have to be doing the things that you're asking them to do, and you have to comment and model that. And for me, I think any success with this stuff just is based on, the simple, truism of sweat. I work a ton. I'm an adjunct. I'm doing this for peanuts. This is not about I'm making X amount of money per hour. This is a labor of love. And it's also that I really think that what we get out of this, and I get as much as the students, is I do get a sense of community, and I get a sense of a creative community where I'm learning from people and they're learning from me. And it's not ever, we're all equals and everything works out in the end. No, I grade them. There's definitely a power dynamic. I don't want to ignore that. But I've never been in a class where I felt that there was so much freedom for us to communicate, to dialogue, and to learn from each other, and for me to go out and demonstrate what I've learned from other students and how that's helped me. It's not easy to do that in other classes, particularly when it's not online or I can't blog the process in the same way. So I really think that I get so much from just doing this, and it puts me in a mode for 5 or 15 weeks of mad creativity, meaning blogging like 30 or 40 times a month, creating all sorts of great design assignments. I love it. I love it because it's always what I thought I wanted to do anyway on the web. And the idea that I can do this with a group of people who are engaged is a dream. And I think a lot of faculty out there feel that way about their discipline. And I think if they approach their discipline, no matter what it is, it doesn't have to be digital storytelling, in a creative way that invites the students to think and kind of frame what they're doing creatively, and digital tools make that a lot easier. I think you can create a community out of your class. I don't think it's specific to DS106. And a lot of people have said, this couldn't be done if it wasn't for you. You're like a cult leader. You're like James Jones. But I don't think that's true. Martha Burtis has had unbelievable success doing this with her students. Alan Levine has. Michael Branson Smith, who's teaching at the City University of New York. Scott Lockman, who was teaching this in Japan at the University of Temple. Brian Short, who was teaching this at the University of Michigan. This is not limited to personality. This is an approach, and an approach that engages and invites you to be as much a part of that process as your students. And that changes everything.
Yeah. I've done about 40 of these interviews with inspiring, engaged educators, and I have to think that this has got to be the most inspiring and engaged. Thank you so much, Jim. I suspect this is not the last time we're going to talk about this.
Well, Howard, I'm honored. Thank you very much.